So let's take a look at understanding diversity in the marketplace. And this is part two of chapter one. Our previous discussion, we really talked about the foundation we would operate within and some of the historical framework. Here we start to get into the marketplace and how diversity interacts with the marketplace. So our first frame of reference here is to take a look at the marketplace itself and its structure. How is it set up? The consumer behavior, which is a critical piece of a diversity planning discussion, will come into play, as well as the global competitiveness aspect of this, because no longer can we look at things from a local perspective. Diversity segmentation and how we go after a certain portion of the market effectively from a business standpoint, the value proposition that we build on the business side of the house and on the consumer side of the house, and then last but not least, looking at the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats that make up our SWOT from a diversity perspective. So let's look at the industry structure. The structure is really defined by companies and industries even too that are pure monopolies first and foremost. There's about four of these. Pure monopolies, a single firm like the post office, utilities, usually some form of government regulation is involved. An oligopoly then is a small number of firms like oil and steel. These are pure companies, they're similar commodity, and they differentiate themselves slightly by their products, but there are few companies that operate in this area. The third area that we want to look at from an industry structure standpoint is a monopolistic competition. So you have competitors such as in restaurants and barbershops, but they focus on market segments to meet specific customer needs. So you go to a restaurant to eat, you go to a barbershop to get your hair cut, etc. And then last but not least, for our capitalistic society, pure competition. So here we have a lot of firms, a lot of competitors, and then limited government intervention for the most part. So that kind of lays out the industry structure. And so the question you should start asking yourself at this point is, how does diversity fit into this particular equation? So let's continue that discussion by looking at, trying to answer that question to some degree by looking at consumer and employee behavior. So we have a diverse segment of the population that makes up consumers. And then you could put on the same hat as a consumer and be an employee. But your behavior and how you make decisions is extremely important for a business in trying to create a value proposition. So in order to do that, there are some factors that we can simplify and take into consideration. One of those is the influencing factors. So these are the cultural aspect of who you are, the psychological aspect, the social aspect, as well as the personal aspect of who you might be and what makes up you and your being. Whereas on the other side of the equation, and not an exception to, we have decision-making factors. So these are a function of need recognition, taking a look at information collection, as well as the ability to build a value through acquisition and then finally assessment. So this particular slide kind of gives you a view of the value proposition and how it can be built based upon influencing factors and decision-making factors. And those, of course, go down to the individual level. So the individual then really comes from a framework of family. This has been extensively researched. Family is a highly influential reference group. And of course, we have other groups that we operate within as individuals as well. But the thing about groups is not which group. It's more important to look at the membership being direct in influence, and then whether or not we are from reference groups, whether they are direct or indirect for their influence. And last but not least, in those groups, in our families, as individuals, we have various roles that we play. And in a workplace environment, we're expected to have a certain behavior as an individual. But in our personal side, we'll have various roles throughout the course of our entire life. Taking this same discussion a little bit further, then the individual is looking to be motivated. Now, not only motivated from an individualistic perspective, but then businesses are looking to motivate you. So they need to know about you, your culture, where you come from, how you operate, what your value system is about. So motivation is an energizing force for business. Freud, Maslow, Herzberg all had theories about motivation, but most important here, motivation helps businesses with their analysis and their strategy. If they know where consumers are coming from, they can anticipate what products and services to deliver. If that's a diverse consumer group that they're speaking to, then they can be even more detailed and precise as to what products and services would be most beneficial to them. Always in a learning mode. So there are changes in our behavior and they come from learning experiences. And they really, on the business side, get to people in a way that makes them think of loyalty. Loyalty is important in business. Why? Because we are talking about trust, we're talking about value, we're talking about respect. We're talking about the ability to rely comfortably on an organization to provide the things that you need as a consumer. On the flip side of that, businesses know that there's a certain amount of the segment of the population they can rely on, and they've learned this through surveys and scans that they've done over the years. Last but not least, on consumer and employee behavior, attitude is important. So attitude is about evaluations, feelings, actions toward a person or object, and it's a key to decision making because it shapes our values and beliefs and helps determine who we are. It gives businesses yet another tool in the marketplace to help them evaluate products and services they want to be able to offer. So let's look at this from now at kind of a marketing standpoint, since we've given you the framework of the marketplace structure for industries. And now we're kind of drilling down to the business aspect of this. Let's look at it from a marketing standpoint and just give you a different view. And so when we talk about need recognition, it's very important that we simplify the discussion from a diversity standpoint. So let's just take something as simple as potato chips. So you look in the cupboard and you find out immediately that there are no potato chips. And so you go to the grocery store, and when you get to the grocery store, down the potato chip aisle, there are all types of chips: jalapeno, sweet, hot, spicy, ridges, non-ridges. You get a little bit of everything. Well, marketers look at this and they know that there's a shortcoming of product. So they're going to do a scan to find out what your needs are, and they're going to recognize that by starting to develop products that can satisfy your needs. This information collection through the scan actually, and this is the key piece from a diversity standpoint in the discussion, comes from various groups of people, various types of people, gender, background, ethnicity, sexual orientation, whatever it may be. But this information collection really helps them search for the right potato chips or the right product to put out in the market. So they introduce these various products to you, and you get a value through your acquisition of those. They look like something you'd be interested in, so you make a decision to purchase these potato chips. And marketers then know they have produced the value that's important for you to then repeat that type of activity. You, on the other hand, as the consumer, the diverse consumer, will value through assessment whether or not you will make another purchase again. So you'll compare potato chips for your next purchase, and marketers will hope to get a repeat consumer out of you. So this is just another way to look at how business and diversity dissect one another, and how important it would be for marketers to have a lot of information about people in order to help produce products and services that people would want. So let's take that discussion even further now and broaden the perspective to look at it from a global competitive standpoint. So we can no longer look at things from a local marketplace perspective. If you have a website, you put it on the web, you are now global. And you need to look at it from the standpoint of, I need to assess how well I'm doing based upon my performance, my strategy, and how I use the technological advances that are out there that various consumers will be familiar with, or in some cases need to be educated and not as familiar with. So I analyze my global competitiveness by looking at the environmental opportunities, government action, consumer strength of the products and services that I'm offering. How do I do that? I have to develop a strong SWOT, because the SWOT leads to the SWOT analysis, which then leads to my strategy. And this is an important link that we'll talk about in later chapters into how you build that SWOT effectively to help you further down the line when you look to implement your diversity plan. Adaptation is important on a global competitive basis, because you are targeting globally and you're marketing a segment globally. So think of it in terms of If I marketed a product in China, that same product would have to be, or possibly would be, different in how I marketed it in South America or the United States or Canada. So this adaptation is not only for myself, but when I look at competitors, suppliers, supply and demand, the integrated marketing effort that is put forth, everyone has to adapt in order to remain competitive. And then last but not least, how do I apply this to my diversity plan when I'm implementing it? So I've got to have a good strategy, and I've got to be effective in communication. Now, the communication is not as simple as I send out a message in English or I have an all English website. No, the communication might be that I have many or various options that I can communicate within, and then I'm ready to adapt to the change based upon the demands and the supply of the market. So we alluded to the SWOT and why it is important. So if you look at this particular diagram, it tells you that strengths and weaknesses are internal components, while opportunities and threats are external components. Strengths and opportunities are considered favorable, while weaknesses and threats are considered unfavorable. So the questions that I initially want to ask myself when I am building my SWOT is, where am I strongest in my organization? And I ask that from a diversity perspective. Where am I weakest? Where are my greatest opportunities? And what are my greatest threats? Now, we take that discussion a step further, because after we've built the SWOT, we really need to move into the analysis phase. And this is where we really get the rubber to meet the diversity road, because we take those strengths and we compare them against our opportunities, and we ask ourselves, what are we going to do with our strengths as compared against our opportunities? Or our weaknesses are against our opportunities, our strengths against our threats, and our weaknesses are against our threats. This is where we analyze the data to give us even more insight and depth into how we develop a strategy. And we have to answer these questions honestly in the SWOT in order to get a good, clean analysis, and then be able to eventually develop our diversity programs and implement our plan. So here are some definitions that I think might be beneficial for us. Consumer behavior, the behavior of individuals when they're buying goods and services for their own use or consumption. The value proposition that we talked about earlier. It's a statement of who the target market is for a particular product, the products that are going to benefit them, and what price will be charged as a result of that. Social needs, personal innate feelings of deprivation that one might have or others collectively might have. The primary group, members of a family, peers, they have an effect on consumer spending or purchase power and behavior. And then lifestyle. Lifestyle, a pattern of living based upon activities, our interests, our opinions, the totality of a person. So what did we learn today? Well, we learned that there's an intersection with diversity in the marketplace and the marketplace and how it's structured. And it's important to understand that from a capitalistic standpoint. Consumer behavior creates value not only for the consumer, but then for a company, employees. Understanding how to create that value proposition is important. Global competitiveness. How does strategy differ on a local basis versus a global competitive structure? And really now in the 21st century, we're operating globally. And then the business diversity segmentation. How do the goals, strategy, and segmentation tie into our overall diversity effort when we're building our diversity plan? And then the value itself. If I create value, does that mean I'm going to be successful? Not necessarily. There's more to this than just creating value. And then the SWOT. How do I develop the diversity analysis after I've conducted the SWOT? So a lot to encompass in this particular section, part 2 of chapter 1. But I think it gives us good footing to move forward from here. So here is your thought for the day. Life is what happens to you while you're busy making other plans.